Every video game gets one launch, one chance where it can succeed or fail. Granted, many average games can be improved over the years, but rarely is an outright failure actually salvaged. And in the case of MMORPGs, the bad games die very, very quickly. But there's one exception to this: Final Fantasy XIV. The second MMO in the Final Fantasy series originally launched in 2010 to horrible reviews from critics and players alike, but against all conventional wisdom, Square Enix stuck with the game, and nearly a decade later, Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn stands out as one of the company's most beloved and profitable games. Today on Game Files, we're taking a look at how Final Fantasy XIV overcame its disastrous launch to become not only one of the best Final Fantasy games, but one of the best MMOs ever made. Development on Final Fantasy XIV started in 2005. Square Enix was looking to make another MMO under the brand following the success of Final Fantasy XI, which had proven to be very profitable when it launched back in 2002. The company decided to put XI's original producer, Hiromichi Tanaka, in charge of the project, with the aim that the game would be completed in time for the 7th console generation. After being announced in 2009, Final Fantasy XIV launched in 2010 for PC worldwide. Let me quote some reviews. Final Fantasy XIV is a broken, incomprehensible mess. Here's another. It's a shallow, grind-heavy MMO crippled by a horrible interface and nonsensical player limitations. Bad quest design, a bad story, a limitation on how much you could level up. Basically, no one liked it, and that reflected in Square Enix's financials. In 2011, the company reported a 33% loss in profit compared to the year before, and it was blamed on Final Fantasy XIV. So what went wrong? As it turns out, almost everything, but there were three key areas where Square Enix failed. The first was that developers were obsessed with graphics, and to be fair, Final Fantasy XIV looked gorgeous, but it was far too taxing on the system. For example, a flower pot had the same amount of polygons as the player character. It's a nice flower pot, but it doesn't need to be that nice. Secondly, the development team didn't have a lot of experience with MMOs. PCs aren't as popular as consoles in Japan, which means MMOs aren't played as much. Final Fantasy XI was the primary reference point, but it was a console game released in 2002. No one had been paying much attention to the changes in the genre since, which means no one had really played World of Warcraft, for example. Lastly, Square Enix was aware of the problems in the game, but decided to live by the mantra that those problems could be fixed later. That's not exactly the healthiest attitude to have in game development. With the game in freefall, Square Enix was desperate, so they turned to a man who has little experience with either Final Fantasy or MMOs to save it: Naoki Yoshida, or as he's much better known, Yoshi P. Tanaka was removed 3 months after Final Fantasy XIV's release, and Yoshi P had a lot of work ahead of him. He was tasked with rebooting the game in the span of 2 years, which is less than half the time a game this size would normally take to develop, and he had to do it all while patching the original to keep it limping along in the meantime. With a new development team in hand, he made the logical choice in 2012. He blew up the world. No, seriously, a meteor came down and blew up Final Fantasy XIV. The game's servers died in November 2012 to allow 14 to be fully rebuilt, and in August of 2013, Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn went live. While the bar was set extremely low thanks to how awful the original was, A Realm Reborn actually managed to surpass everyone's expectations. It's an enjoyable MMO fundamentally, with strong mechanics backing a well-designed world and story. It may not be as graphically good as the original, but the trade-off was worth it. Within a year, it had over 4 million subscribers. Square Enix's profits went up. Yoshi P became beloved by Final Fantasy fans everywhere. Everything was good, which meant it was now time for developers to really flex their muscles. For 4 years, the staff had to focus on rebuilding and saving the game. With that out of the way, more time was taken to polish and build out the system set in place for each of the game's expansions. The first, Heavensward, came out in 2015 to much acclaim and a player base that was eager for more. Its tale of class warfare against the backdrop of a 1,000-year-long dragon war proved to be a hit with players, especially since it retained that distinct Final Fantasy feel throughout. This was followed up with Stormblood in 2017, which added fan-favorite classes like the Red Mage and Samurai back into the swing of things. But both would pale in comparison to 2019's Shadowbringers, which cemented Final Fantasy XIV's status as one of Square Enix's best games in decades. It's the culmination of 6 years of hard work, with everyone from the composer to the writers to the level designers putting in the best work of their careers. What was once a game that struggled to keep up with modern MMO design has since become a title that establishes the baseline of what MMORPGs should be. Final Fantasy XIV shouldn't be where it is today. Its awful start should have marked the beginning and end of its relevance to the world. But thanks to a combination of miracles and desire to make things right, Square Enix has ensured that Final Fantasy XIV will not be remembered as a failure. Instead, it will be remembered as one of the greatest comebacks in video game history.